Thanks for watching live or listening back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hey, good evening and welcome to the Late Show with Tim Smale. Tonight, we are going to be talking about raising the green flag and whether schools can really afford to ignore that. My guest tonight will be Simon Lightman. He's an educator, researcher, and a sustainability leader. And sustainability, I think, is one of the most important conversations in schools right now. But it does keep slipping down the priority order as soon as exam pressure begins to rise. And Simon is someone who is not only in the classroom, who's seeing this at the coalface every day, but he's also responsible for a cross-sector open letter to Parliament that called for curriculum renewal. And what I want to ask is whether schools can really afford not to take this seriously. And the way I want to start tonight is with a question that has sat with me for the past week. I teach history. I don't teach sustainability. And I've been asking myself whether that actually matters, whether the subject I teach, the way that I plan my lessons, the way that I choose to sort of express myself, the things that I choose to say or not to say to the young people in front of me on a Wednesday afternoon. I keep wondering, is that connected to one of the biggest challenges of our time? And I suspect the answer is yes. I'm just not sure how. Now, my guest tonight has spent years trying to answer that exact question, not in the abstract, but in the classroom, in schools, and most recently with that letter to Parliament. And the letter says quite plainly that English education is not yet fit for the world our students are inheriting. Now, I'm not an expert on sustainability. Like, I'm here as a teacher, I'm here as a parent, I'm here as someone who thinks that this conversation is long overdue. And so I really want to get into it. So as is my weekly wont, I'm going to talk about one of the headlines that I've been looking at and thinking about recently. And this week, I want to talk about Ofsted's new report cards. They launched in November, and the data coming back is already causing a bit of a row. Like, schools serving the most disadvantaged communities are almost 3 times more likely to be marked down on achievement than schools in the most affluent areas. And head teachers in those more deprived areas are calling it demoralizing. They say Ofsted is really inspecting attainment, not achievement, and that the system can't tell the difference between a school that is failing its students and a school that is fighting for them against the odds. Now, Ofsted's Chief Inspector, Sir Martin Oliver, says he will not downplay disappointing outcomes for disadvantaged children. And I understand that. Like, low expectations dressed up as compassion is its own kind of failure. But here's where, for me, it gets interesting for tonight's show. Simon has co-signed an open letter calling on Ofsted to incorporate sustainability into its inspection framework. And I've been sitting with that request all week, alongside this story, and wondering if schools in challenging areas are already being penalized by an inspection system that does not fully account for their context. What happens when we add another layer of expectation on top? I also began to wonder, will anything actually change if our metric for success is always going to be exam results? So is the answer that we need to ask more from Ofsted, or is Ofsted the problem? And that's one of the questions I'm going to put to Simon tonight. So if you have any questions, any thoughts, any ideas, please do comment, like, and express your views as you listen live to the show. So my thoughts then. Like, I've been teaching for over 20 years, and in that time I've worked in the UK and across several other countries, and right now I'm here in Luxembourg. And really what strikes me is that the conversation about sustainability in education sounds very different depending on where you're standing. Yeah, in some schools, sustainability is woven into the curriculum. It's woven into the culture, the physical environment, and it is taken seriously. In other schools, including some where I worked, it's a recycling bin and a green flag. It's a lunchtime club that's run by one very exhausted geography teacher because they care a little bit more about it than anybody else. And here's what bothers me, is that there is a massive gap between those two versions of a school. It's not really about resources or ambition. I think it's about whether leadership has decided this matters, whether it's treated as an optional or as an essential. And Simon argues that it is a leadership and governance problem, not a curriculum problem. And the more I've read, like, his work in particular this week, the more I think that he might well be right. And that makes me really uncomfortable, because if it is a leadership problem, then silence is also a choice. So what do you think? Tell me, am I wrong? So we're going to welcome our guest onto the show. Simon Lightman is a secondary school teacher. He's a head of philosophy and religious studies. He is a distinctive voice in sustainability education in the UK. He is co-chair of SEED, the Sustainability and Environmental Education body, and founder of the City of London Youth Natural Environment Board. And that's a platform that really does give young people influence over environmental governance. He holds an MA in Global Learning from UCL and has published in the European Journal of Sustainable Development. He has a Substack, Structures and Selves. He explores the intersection of education, philosophy, and sustainability. And he recently won the Robert J. Jones Award for Environmental Education. Most recently, he convened this open letter for curriculum renewal and a sustainable future that was submitted in October 2025 to the Department for Education, Ofsted, and the Education Select Committee. And it was signed by educators, researchers, youth leaders, and civil society partners across the show. Simon, without further ado, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm very well, my friend. It's an absolute pleasure to be here again with you and to have the opportunity to talk through these issues, which I know we're both very passionate about. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to really getting into the weeds today and seeing where we can try and get some clarity on some of these questions.
So we're going to, for those who are listening to the show for the first time, we break down our show into 4 parts and we have a few features within it. There are several challenges. I am tasked with the difficult job of trying to make Simon laugh live on camera as I tell a story from someone else's teaching experience. We have the terrifying quickfire quiz at the end of the show, as well as things like lessons learned and a marking break. So let's get stuck in, Simon, into what we're actually trying to talk about. There's lots of questions that I kind of want to get into grip to. The first one is going to be like, what was your own sort of personal awakening with where education is at the moment with sustainability?
My first personal awakening, I think there's 2 moments which have really given me clarity. One was when I lived back in Peru, and I think it was 2015. We had terrible flash floods. They're known as huaicos, and these happened because of glacial melt from the Andes and just massive amounts of water running down from the Andes through into Lima and the surrounding areas, and it just caused destruction on a huge scale, disrupted just the everyday society. People were, stockpiling stuff and draining supermarkets of water. And you notice straight away how it became an issue of class and privilege, because those who had money were going up with their 4x4s to fill up their trucks with water and whatever else, etc., etc. And I lived, very lucky. I lived in a very nice area. I went for a run one morning, and I was running near the US Embassy. And the US Embassy down there in Monterrico is surrounded by lots of grass. Even though Lima's in the desert, there are places with lots of grass because they pump lots of water and they make sure it looks nice and green. And there was a guy who I always ran past who was the gardener. And I always used to nod to him, as I ran past. It was just like, a thing. And I saw that he was watering the grass, even though there was a hose pipe ban, and there had been for quite a long time. So I just stopped and just asked him. I said, hey, what's going on? You're not supposed to be watering the grass. And he said, and he looked at me so downtrodden and said, I know this. I know that I shouldn't be doing this, but I've been told to do this. And if I don't, I'll lose my job. And I've already had to, wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning to get to work today because of all the disruption to the transport, because of the flooding and everything. And I can't deal with anything more. So we had a bit of a chat, and I carried on. And I didn't realize until a long time later how much that had really sat with me, and how that experience of understanding how issues of climate intersect with issues of justice in a really real, lived, personal way was something that informs not only what we need to do politically as a society, but what I can do as a teacher, and what I can do as an educator, as someone who cares about the futures of young people and the way we are developing collectively. So I'd say that was a very formative moment for me. And then the other one, I don't know if there is a particular moment, to be honest, but it's a collective series of experiences which have made it clear to me that the priorities which I thought, because of the words that people said, were present, I started to realize that actually, in many cases, the words are being said, but when you scratch beneath the surface, you realize that actually there's a lack of willingness to interrogate why those things are the way they are, and to make the actual changes that potentially need to be made, and the ones that would disrupt the comfortable status quo, right? So I think those combination of those two things have led me to the point where I realized, sustainability is, as you said, is not something which is just a bolt on, is actually a framing through which we can understand the purposes of education are and need to be to meet the challenges of, well, I was going to say the challenges of the future, but really they're the challenges of the present, because it's with us, right? We keep thinking this like moment in time is going to come where everything's going to become really difficult, but actually we're there. If you look at the facts on the ground, the impact of our extractivist system on the environment is very, very clear, and is intersecting with a lot of other factors, and is contributing to many of the widespread systemic issues that we see. That's the kind of, I think, the starting point.
I guess that kind of leads me into my next question, because we sort of maybe talk about people saying the words, but not necessarily once we scratch beneath the surface, sort of living those values. And I guess that kind of sends me off in two different directions. One is, look, most schools, let's be honest, they've got a few recycling bins, right? And there's lots of schools who are using recycled paper, and there are definitely things that people are putting onto their websites which will count as plastic fantastic, sort of things that will look good. They'll look good for parents, but they don't necessarily contribute.
Yeah.
And also, the other prong I've got is, will anything change if our metric for success doesn't change, which is exam results, right? Like I, as a teacher, and to be fair, my school doesn't worry about it, but certainly in the past, as a teacher, you're judged based on your exam results, right?
Yeah.
So these kinds of things, and the recent Ofsted comments suggest that the schools are still being measured by their attainment in exam results. So I guess, look, there's so many questions I want to go off and fire, but most schools have got a recycling bin and a green flag, right?
Yeah.
Is there anything wrong with that?
Absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Those things are good things, and they're often implemented by people who are wanting to do the right thing, often by people who care deeply, especially when it goes beyond just the odd recycling bin and recycling paper to actually, putting together, thoughtful projects to try to create green spaces in the school, or to get young people involved in recycling initiatives or whatever. But the issue is, and this is where, please forgive me, I am a philosophy teacher first and foremost. I'm going to try my best not to go off into the stratosphere of philosophical musing, trying to bridge the gap between the big conceptual ideas and something very lived, because I believe that's really important. But
we can use,
all
but
that
just use
stuff,
shorter words for me.
Yeah, all of that stuff is behavior.
Yeah.
And the issue is, it doesn't operate at the level of being. I'll give you an example. You could go into a school and you could see students, I don't know, engaged in a recycling activity of some kind, maybe sorting recycling or promoting recycling or whatever. And then immediately afterwards, they're going into an exam room where they're going to be ranked individually, and they're going to be pushed into this very competitive model of success, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if you ask young people to behave sustainably whilst educating them into a way of being that teaches them that they are separate from the systems that they are part of, and that they need to just focus on their individual success, then you create a very incoherent system. And this is something that's playing on my mind so much, which is the coherence of systems. Young people are really good at picking up on when stuff is incoherent, and when the system says one thing and does something else.
Yeah.
So, there's lots of people who have talked about this stuff for a long time. People who I admire deeply, people like Stephen Sterling or Arjun Wells, they argue that if it only sits at the level of content or just at the level of behavior, then it's never going to stick. For sustainability education to actually have an impact on helping young people to have the skills, the capacities, and the willingness to navigate this complicated situation, and possibly to try to contribute to make it better, then it has to engage with their assumptions about what's the point of learning, what kind of person is this education actually producing. So I don't think it's that schools are not doing enough. I think there's lots of schools doing lots of stuff, but the problem is they're doing lots of stuff, and a lot of institutions are not thinking about how it's connected to that deeper shift. So they're getting students to perform sustainability, but they're still educating them into a system that's, gosh, how would you call it? I mean, it's disconnected from what I would call like sustainable flourishing. And I'll come back to flourishing a bit later, because that's a word that I use that has a certain meaning, but I'll come to that in a bit.
I mean, I would love to hear from our listeners who are listening to the live show. Yeah, well, what are your schools doing with regards to sustainability? Yeah, because at the moment, I do feel that we have quite a few contradictions. I worry that sustainability is maybe taught about in geography, possibly in science, Certainly climate change will be taught about in science. And then we'll have lunchtime or an after school club. We'll have an enrichment activity. And it's then that's when we see the recycling project, or we see the kind of student committee coming together and talk about it. And I know there are lots of kind of sort of schemes being proposed by the government, and that certainly the government had the sustainability and climate change strategy in 2022, and in there were lots of kind of keynotes for what schools could do in the future. So I guess that's my next question. Like, did that strategy go far enough, and has it had an impact in from what you can see?
No, 100% not. And that is the reason why myself and others came together to co-author that open letter, and why we are very keen to have the conversations with the Department for Education and with all the other pertinent stakeholders, because that guidance, as well-meaning as I'm sure it is, actually, I'm going to be quite strong here, actually is detrimental, because what it gives institutions is the easy out. And I have very strong feelings now, as time has gone on, about organizations or groups which give schools the easy out, or give any institution, be it universities as well, the easy out. What do I mean by that? So to connect it to the sustainability guidance, it allows schools to do this without any rigor. It's not mandated. There's no cost behind it. And, you can literally box tick your way through it and make out that you're working in accordance. This is made even worse by the fact that there is, rightly so, phrasing which says, it should be topics in science and geography. But anybody who spends time with the literature knows that, yes, that is the case. That is obviously a natural home for certain aspects of sustainability education, right? Be it the empirical evidence base of sustainability education. But the world never moved, Tim, because of facts alone. Right? This is the fundamental miscalculation which lots of people have. The world does not move just because of facts. The world moves because of facts aligned with values. And when you just disconnect sustainability from values and from critical thinking and from a holistic approach to what it means to actually be educated and to contribute to society, etc., etc., it doesn't work. So I come back to my point on, I get quite animated on this point, because that type of thing gives people the easy out. And then you have your organizations which go into schools and they will green them up by sticking some, solar panels here and there and and all this type of stuff. Once again, should all institutions, should all big buildings, public buildings have solar panels? Yes, of course, right? But that is not sustainability education. Schools are not just another structure where you can stick on some, bits and pieces to try and make the actual building more carbon neutral and say you've done the job, because schools and universities and colleges are places where you form the minds and the ideas and the values and the way of being of, the polity, the people. And therefore that comes with a set of responsibilities. So that stuff's really, really damaging. Yeah. And it's really important that we have a different narrative, that actually this work is systemic, it's whole school. And to go back to your original point, it can't just be this bolt-on stuff. It can't just be, a themed week, a club, a set of lessons. Once again, I keep saying, I don't want anybody who's listening to this to think that I'm saying that any of those things are bad. Of course they are good. But it is one thing for something to be good, and it's another thing for something to be great. Right? And if we want schools to be great, then we need to do the hard work of actually joining stuff up. So it has to be a whole school approach. Does the whole system align, right? What gets time? What's assessed? What gets prioritized? What do students experience as being meaningful, right? Because without that stuff, and lots of my research has kind of come to this conclusion. I use a phrase, fragile coherence, where the structures are in place, but they don't translate into the classroom practice, and they don't translate into those deeper shifts. And it's so important that this stuff happens at the classroom level. It has to happen at the policy level, because as I'm going to speak to later, teachers and leaders and everybody works within the constraints of the system and works to those constraints. So if the system doesn't shift, then, you know, it's very hard to imagine or to do outside of it. But it's also very important that teachers spend the time to think about how their everyday interactions, the way they frame knowledge, the way they ask questions, the kinds of connections they make, link up. So there's a lot to talk about. So I'll let you go on, because I'm sure you've got some.
There's a lot. I mean, this is the kind of thing, like I talk about on quite a few shows, that as educators, we are role models for the students that we have in front of us, and it's a privilege to be so. We talked about this with regards to whether the curriculum was ready for 2040. We talked about it with regards to mental health. You and I talked about it when we looked at AI as part of the debate show. You know, and sort of what I look at from your role models when you look at the sustainability and climate change strategy, is that it was promising that the UK education system would be world leading in sustainability and climate change by 2030. Are we on track for that?
I'm sorry, I have to laugh. Because, and by all means, I invite anybody who is listening to this, who thinks differently, to reach out to me, to debate this with me. You know, I can only speak from my limited experience, from the conversations I've had, but we here in, let's say England, I'm going to say England, not going to say the UK, because there is a huge difference between the capacity to embrace progressive, forward-thinking approaches in Scotland, for example, where learning for sustainability is embedded and becoming ever more so in their approach to education. It's in their initial teacher training now. It's in their PGCE programs, and what's happening here in England. I believe Wales as well is much more willing to have these conversations and to move on these things. And just putting my politics teacher hat on one day for a moment, you know, this is an argument I could probably actually use in the classroom to say, you know, why devolution was such a great thing.
Looking at it though, you know, again, I'm going back to your point a little bit, that if we scratch a little bit beneath the surface, because my worry is when you look at Scotland, you know, and they are looking at sort of building data centers, which is going to increase their sort of need for energy by about 75%. You know, if we look at Ireland, you know, we chatted with Rita on our AI show, but one of the things she was talking about was the amount of energy used in and around Dublin. But 79% of Dublin's energy is used to fuel data centers. So again, you know, it kind of comes down to, as we scratch beneath the surface, that's my worry. And I guess the next thing that I guess we can kind of get into later is you've got Richard Tice saying, look, he wants to get rid of net zero. You've got Kemi Badenoch saying, look, please, we're not going to hit our target for 2050. We want to take every drop of oil that we can from the North Sea. We've got Farage saying exactly the same thing, and we're seeing reform councils who are starting to take sustainability out of the agenda. We're seeing conservatives who are promising this on a more sort of nationwide level. And well, I guess that's why it's so important to have this conversation, because it's going to come down, though, isn't it, to the role models who are in the classroom, those role models who are going to keep their promises and are actually going to deliver on this. Is going to be teachers, right?
100%. And just to, you know, we will bring it back to education, but just to speak to what you said, there is very little bandwidth in the average human in the world today to care about climate change, given the situation that many people are living through.
Yeah.
You know, we are experiencing global conflict again. We are experiencing huge economic downturn. We are experiencing, you know, job insecurity, mass migration, and a whole host of other issues. And what has happened is that climate change, man's impact on the environment is still, for however much there's mass flooding in Pakistan and, you know, floods here and hottest summer ever, it's still a future human problem.
Yeah.
And humans are not programmed to care about an abstract future, right? We care about what's right in front of us, because that's how we survive. That's how we've developed biologically. So it's hard. And people like your Richard Tices and others who are pushing back against what they call the net zero agenda, etc., they are contributing to this and also responding to it, because they know that there's political capital there, and they know that they can say something that's going to disrupt things. And they also know that actually it's hard to get the average person to care about things which won't have a direct impact on them, and to ask people to sacrifice. And just to bring it back, because you mentioned teachers, and I'm going to go quite in a long detour here a little bit, but it links into the culture of individualism, which is so destructive in our society, which dovetails a lot with something you and I have discussed before, and I know something you care about as much as I do, which is your recent show talking about the negative impact of toxic male role models online. I imagine lots of people who are listening have watched Louis Theroux's recent documentary on the manosphere. I was shocked, because I'm not on TikTok and I'm not on all this stuff, and I just hear about it secondhand. And then finally I was actually watching this and I was like, what? And these people are a manifestation of the same individualism, which is all about a me. I'll take whatever I can get from the world, and I don't have to have any responsibility for the other, which is actually, I would say, one of the goals of sustainability education, believe it or not, is to disrupt that way of thinking, because to care about the environment is to care about the whole. And therefore, it is by its very nature an anti-individualist way of thinking. Not in the sense that you don't get the right to care about yourself, because we all have that right, but in the sense of only prioritizing the self over anybody else.
Okay, so we've just had a sort of question come in, which is how would you respond to, and it's in three parts. Like, first of all, those people who don't think climate change is real. Secondly, those people who think it's a far left endeavor and see the fact other countries like China, etc., are doing so much damage.
Okay, there's quite a lot going on there. First of all, let's go piece by piece. How would I respond to people who don't think climate change is real? I would utilize not only the power of the facts of science, but potentially try to have an opportunity to talk to them about the legitimacy of the scientific method itself. You know, I can't help but think that anyone who thinks that climate change is not real is someone who is perhaps misinformed or misunderstands the legitimacy of the scientific method.
I mean, just going to jump in there, certainly statistics wise, like earthday.org had carried out a survey in 2024, which suggested that 86% of teachers and 84% of parents absolutely believed in the importance of climate change education. It was slightly lower with students, saying about 65%. And that's, I'm starting to notice that a little bit. There's a little bit of a shift in the media that seems to be moving back from the initial absolutely we're on board, this is terrible, we need to do something about it, to is it real? But I think there's enough people in society who are, look, this is real. It is a thing. The stats are there, the facts are there.
I think it's, once again, it's that human tendency that we don't want to look at the sun because it burns, right? and we are very good at creating narratives because of our confirmation bias. And as I said, we're living in times where the more immediate pressures of life have ramped up, and therefore I don't think lots of people have the bandwidth for thinking about the bigger existential crises of the climate, etc. It's still far enough off, and it still doesn't affect those in the rich West as much as it needs to, or perhaps to actually get them to change. Because I think
we're not on the front line.
If you go to other parts of the world where it is much more apparent. So, for example, if you go to Huaraz in Peru, I went there 20-something years ago, and I sledded down a glacier, Pastururi. Pastururi doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
And is that part of a far left?
It's melted away, right?
Is that a part of a far left endeavor?
No, it's not a far left endeavor. And, you know, there are people who want to sow the seeds of division by turning, because there's, okay, once again, politics teacher hat on, there is consensus on economics in the world today. So because there is consensus on how we do economics generally amongst all the major political parties in most countries, in order for them to have something to actually differentiate themselves, they have to dive deeper into the social issues. And what that means is that in the backlash to decades of progressive ideas around sexuality and gender, etc., you've got now the backlash of people who use the term woke, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. I have my issues with the whole woke extremism, and I will use the term extremism because I believe there has been a tendency amongst the far left, whatever you want to call them, to embrace some ways of thinking which actually are very contrary to, dare I say it, reason, right? I'm a bit old-fashioned in that way. I like that idea of enlightenment reason. And we need to be very careful about that. I think when I read a question like that as well, Tim, I get the implication around the idea of being very cautious around education that indoctrinates. And I think all good educators know this, right? They know their job is not to push their agenda.
Yeah.
But, and I'm going to be controversial here, all education starts from a set of agreed moral truths, right? And I use the ideas of people like Michael Hand in my classroom. And if it is something where you can actually have a rational debate, where two sides can be given, where both sides have rational legitimacy, then that is open to discussion. Things like racism or bigotry of all kinds, I'm sorry, but any argument that you bring to the table for why you hate people of another color skin, or you think women are inferior, or, you know, homosexual people are evil or whatever, these are based on irrational prejudice, and therefore they have no place in society. Yeah, sorry, quite a wide-ranging answer there, but I see the links between the education stuff and the other stuff quite a lot.
I think it's beautiful. Right, we're ending part one. So shout out to AQA. Are you ready to make an impact beyond the classroom? AQA is looking for teachers like you to become examiners this summer. You'll build your CPD, strengthen your understanding of the mark scheme, and gain fresh insights to enhance your teaching. It's flexible, paid work that fits around your commitments, with full training from AQA's experts and ongoing support from an experienced team leader. So whether you're an early years teacher or have years of classroom experience, examining with AQA is a valuable way to develop your knowledge and join a community of subject specialists. Join AQA as an examiner this summer. So visit AQA.com/examiner www.leadership.org.uk/apply today. Oh, shout out board. So, dear listeners, is there anybody who needs a shout out? Any teachers or leaders who are deserving of some extra recognition? Is there anyone who works on the school site, who supports within a classroom, who needs a kind word or a general bit of educational love? If you have those, please do not hesitate to either shout out via comments or to send me a message. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. So Simon, we are against the clock slightly, so we're going to have to kind of keep that in mind. But lessons learned, are there any sort of mistakes or big moments that were difficult in your career that sort of ended up teaching you something valuable?
Oh, gosh. Lessons learned, things that have taught me something valuable.
Yeah.
I mean, I've learned a lot of lessons throughout my years. I mean, I guess, and this is very personal, you know, you can probably guess, Tim, I'm somebody who likes a good line of argument, right? And I guess I thought that if you could bring the argument to the table like a good philosopher, right? If I can show you, you know, the steps of the argument, I'd be able to convince you, you know, and I'd get things to change. And throughout my career in lots of different places and in different situations, I've had lots of conversations with different senior leaders. And, you know, people say to me, yes, this is amazing. I agree. Da, da, da. And, you know, I genuinely feel that they saw the importance and they could see the logic and they gave me the impression that things would shift. And you can probably see where I'm going with this. But as time goes on, you see that perhaps they have the willingness for things to shift, but it's very hard and things don't actually shift that much in practice because the same old pressures dominate, right? The day-to-day stuff of the school carries on as it always has. And I guess, you know, it was actually quite hard. You learn a lot through that stuff because you start to see that there's a gap, not between what people say and what they do. That's the easy thing to say. People are just hypocrites. They say one thing, they do something else. No, I think it's deeper than that. I think most of those people who would want to do these things, but there's a gap between what the people say they matters and what the system itself makes possible. And when I started to realize that, that's when it was a turning point for me. In fact, that was probably, if I think about it right now on the hoof, that's probably the thing that kind of pushed me to do the open letter, because I realized that it's not just ideas. It's because schools are full of ideas and good intentions, etc. Yeah. But you need to actually have a system which helps to change stuff through, you know, what gets protected, what gets prioritized, what's built into that system. Because if stuff isn't reflected in the focus of leadership, you know, you mentioned that that's a big focus of my work, you know, in the accountability systems, etc., then it just lives in those conversations. So that's the thing that shifted for me. It's what I found quite difficult. And it's not a particular moment, but it's lots of little moments which collectively acted in a certain way to bring my thinking into focus, I would say. And that's it's a good thing. It's a good thing to have those opportunities, you know, but nonetheless, it's not easy when you're dealing with it on the ground day to day.
Yeah, I think it's there are similarities, I think, with the lesson that I want to kind of share, which is that actually is a good thing. You know, sitting around the table in a leadership meeting and having people disagree with you, actually is a real positive thing, and something I've learned to welcome throughout my career. I always think it's important to challenge and to question and to debate and to discuss and to celebrate other people's perspectives and expertise.
100%. I mean, look, we're teachers. We should be living what we practice, right? Hopefully, we're not saying to our students, don't debate, don't disagree, you know, just all nod along. So we should be willing to do it ourselves, you know, in our actual lives. Like,
Depends what part of the week it is, Simon. Depends what part of the week it is. Thank you so much. Okay, so this show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. So please do level up your professional development today and visit www.hachetteLearning.com to explore the full range of titles. So, Simon, let's get stuck into the open letter. You know, just give me a quick summary. Like, what did the letter actually ask for? What were the big asks in the letter?
Yeah. Okay. So, you know, so I've gone into the dark again. As you can probably tell, I have an automatic light switch here, which is just flicking on and off constantly. It's not.
It's very symbolic.
I'm not trying to bring like strobe effects into it.
I wondered if that's where you were beginning with the open letter. We started in the dark.
In the dark. No, well, I guess it did come out of the darkness and it's trying to come into the light. I won't make a joke about being Mr. Lightman because obviously that's a bit overdone.
Too far.
But, you know,
too far.
I just did it.
That's a me joke. That's all right.
Yes, very much so. I guess, look, at the core, what was it all about? It's about trying to get alignment between what we say education is for and how stuff actually operates. So, you know, if we say education is about preparing young people for life in the broadest sense of that term, then we need to be really honest about what are the conditions of that life. And young people are growing up in fundamentally complex conditions, which are, you know, shaped by climate breakdown and shaped by inequality and shaped by huge uncertainty. AI has thrown massive amounts of uncertainty into the mix, I think. And all of this is happening in the declining trust in public life, right? I mean, Donald Trump has been in politics now, pretty much dominated US politics for 10 years, Tim. And a lot of the students that we teach, that is their reference point of what the most powerful people in the world are like. So just, you know, let that marinate for a second. Anyway, I won't go off on one about Trump. That's for
no. I'm biting my tongue.
That's for a different conversation.
Just in case Donald is listening in.
Education doesn't just need to help them to cope with that. It needs them to help them to understand it. That's where the technical stuff comes in. And it has to help them to be able to purposefully create meaning for themselves and act within it. So the letter makes a series of very practical asks. It says sustainability, systems thinking, ethical reasoning needs to be embedded in the English curriculum, not just as an additional subject, not just showing up in science or geography, but as part of its very core purpose. And in order to do that, it needs to be integrated into teacher development, and there has to be investment in teacher development to help teachers to feel confident and supported to understand what this is about in the broadest sense. And it needs to create the conditions to support institutions to embed the whole school approaches, which have been demonstrated to be effective. And when I say whole school, I mean something where you connect curriculum and leadership and culture, rather than those piecemeal isolated initiatives that we were talking about earlier. And we need to have an accountability structure there, right? So Ofsted needs to actually, when it goes into a school, ask the head teacher to, you know, demonstrate sustainability in the same way, and maybe we'll come to this later, that they're asked to demonstrate safeguarding, right? Like that's what it has to do. Now, what we're not saying is that this needs to happen overnight. This is long-term renewal. It's meant to be building on the work. It's not about just adding more, right? It's about bringing coherence to what is already there and being more explicit in what we prioritize in education. Because if we don't do that, then everybody will keep saying, oh yeah, this is really important. Like you said, you quoted statistics earlier that 86% of parents, I think you said, recognize this.
86% teachers, 84% of parents.
Recognize this as being important, and slightly less, 60 something of students. but it will always be structurally marginal. And I think if we don't get a handle on this, and I guess the whole reason for writing it was because I think we will actually be letting young people down, and we'll be letting society down if we don't orientate our education system towards these goals. And one final thing, which I've never really spoken about too much, I think, being really pragmatic, we just lose our competitive advantage, right? Like, if we want to continue to have this idea of British education being in all these international schools around the world, then British education still needs to, you know, be the go-to of quality, right? And it has to exist. So I've seen you've got some questions in there.
So Dr. Reed has kindly written in. Thanks for listening to the show, Wayne. I really appreciate it. Does the letter present a fair reflection of modern education, or does it overlook the constraints leaders operate within?
I think that's a wonderful question. And I think partially the constraint that leaders operate in is because the system asks them to only speak to certain criteria by which they are measured. So if the politicians were braver, and the Department for Education, working with Ofsted, working with various other stakeholders, were to, as I say, bring this into the standards for Ofsted, then in fact, I think leaders would feel empowered to put focus into this. And when you delve under the covers as well of what this type of pedagogy and approach looks like in practice, it's not an extra that would add more work to a leadership schedule. It's a reframing of the work of leadership, which actually will make the school thrive and flourish. And on that point, there's a gentleman who's written a book, Anthony Dixon, and his work on leadership for sustainability. Anthony worked in schools for many years, driving through these things, and he makes a really grounded case for how to actually enact this as a school leader. And he makes a strong case there for it's not something which is going to pile on more difficulties. In fact, it's going to perhaps in some sense liberate the school leader who is constrained and help them to actually raise attainment, raise all the other things by making everything come together. So I think, yeah, and that comes from evidence. That's not just a wishful thinking, you know.
And I guess Wayne's kind of he was talking about probably his own particular context, but certainly when I look at things like Ofsted that measures on or focuses on particular agenda items, you can see that until there is some sort of change to take something away, you can understand why in some places leadership might find it really difficult to bring another branch in, which would be sustainability. However, when we're looking at benefits of what we get out for education, there is a lot of research out there that shows that it does benefit things like critical thinking. It does increase knowledge retention. It does increase and improve relationships with parents. It does bring community cohesion. So I guess also there are ways to sort of look at this and justify and say, look, actually, these other things that we are being measured on, this has a real benefit on, and some of the other things that we think what we're doing, we can take those away. I don't know if that sort of answers
100%. Can I just jump in for a second, Tim? Because I think that perhaps we haven't clarified something in this conversation that I often, because of the people I talk to, et cetera, take for granted. But just for clarity's sake, when I'm using the phrase sustainability education, I am thinking about something far beyond climate change education.
Right. Okay.
I'm talking about an approach to education which is fundamentally future focused, which enacts with questions of power, place, positionality, questions of justice, and therefore it's all about engendering strong critical thinking skills, which, as we know, are the basis for success in honestly in all subjects. You know, one of the great strengths of the IB is the TOK course, which gives young people the opportunity in the diploma program to bring together, the aspects of their education. And there's amazing work happening in the IB at the moment with the systems transformation pathway, which has been spearheaded down at UWC Atlantic, and is going to be rolled out, further. So I just wanted to make that clear, because some people might be thinking that we're just talking about teaching kids about climate change and how to fight climate change. That is only part of what we mean when we're talking about sustainability education. There's more, it's a broader frame than that. It links a lot to global citizenship education, Yeah.
Did you get an answer? So, you sent the open letter to the DFE, Ofsted, and the Education Select Committee. What response have you had?
Nothing. So to all your listeners out there, everybody, help us, because I'm trying to get it into, TES. I'm trying to get it into Schools Week. I'm emailing everybody. We're knocking on doors, and we're not getting any answer. And this is not some letter that's just been, signed by a few, people. It's like over 150, individuals who span every facet of education, from renowned professors like Stephen Sterling through to, people who are teaching in primary schools in wherever, all these people who care about this different type of education have come together, and we're all saying something, and so far we've not had a response, which frustrates me. I won't lie, it frustrates me. It's been a hard pill to swallow. People have told me, well, Simon, actually these things often act beyond just whether they can actually get things done. They act as like a calling card, as a moment. But I'm not somebody, if I'm honest, I hate the academic thing of just creating ideas and just, this self-perpetuating system where everybody just scratches each other's back. I love the idea of actually turning it into something that changes. So yeah, we need to move on that. We need to get stuff going. We haven't heard anything.
I mean, there is a rumor that Bridget Phillips listens to this show. I've literally just made that up, so that's the rumor.
I was about to speak to camera. I was about to eyeball the camera, and I was about to do a speech to camera right there. I was going to eyeball the camera and speak directly to Bridget.
I've written to her to ask her to come onto the show, and I got a no, but it was
yes.
Okay.
Well, I wrote to her.
Go on.
But I'm not a constituent, and this is the problem. You don't get answered unless you're a constituent, and then it's very hard to find the routes in. So I'm trying to hustle to find some routes into the Education Select Committee, into Parliament. I think I need to try and get it into the media. We've tried to pitch to the Conversation. We've pitched to TES. We've pitched to Schools Week. We're trying to get our hustle on. I've pitched to all the major newspapers. I've spoken to, I forget, people at Sky, people at BBC who deal with education. There's just a lot going on in the news at the moment, and this isn't. Let's be honest, it's not the sexiest thing. When let's talk about him again. Mr. Trump every day does something crazy.
You've come onto the show that's countering the manosphere. You're coming on to we're all over it. TTR, we love it. That's what we do. We love it.
Good.
So moving on, next part of the show.
The
late rant. Look, this is an opportunity for people to get it off their chests. What are those things that are bothering you, or an itch you need to scratch in education? This is a super positive show, but sometimes we just have to get those things off our chests. And I do think we keep talking about what schools should add. We've got this kind of sustainability matrix. We've got oracy, we've got mental health, we've got digital literacy. And I do get it, because the world is so complex and there's more to know and more to prepare young people for. But, I wonder if we have missed that kind of a more important question. It's not what we add, it's what we're building schools to do in the first place, right? Because if a school exists primarily to produce exam results and fill university places, then these kind of sustainability questions, Simon, I think they're going to feel like a distraction. It'll always be squeezed. It will always be And as we pointed out before, it's always going to be optional. But if a school does exist actually to help young people understand the world they are living in and to take their place in it with some sense of responsibility, then this sustainability matrix isn't an add-on, it's the whole point, right? The curriculum should be that doorway, it shouldn't be the finishing line.
100%. Have you ever come across the work of Gert Biester? Gert Biester is absolutely brilliant. He talks about world-centered education, and you know, this for me is really compelling. There was a time, I see it in historical sense, there was a time for probably the majority of human history where it was all didactic. Teacher would stand at the front of the room, students sit in silence, teacher tells them stuff, they listen, write it down, repeat it, pass exams, right? It was nothing to do with them. Then we realized, oh my gosh, this is terrible. We need to be student-centered, right? Now, I have to navigate this one quite subtly because it might sound as if I'm saying we shouldn't care about students, which of course is not what I'm saying. We deeply have to care about individuals and students. But I think, and this links back to the stuff I was saying about individualism, when we overthink that the horizon of education is the individual, then we reinforce the paradigm of individualism, which is so destructive. So what we need to do is shift our focus to, as Gert says, to the world. Education is not just to help people become the optimal individual in the system. Education is, I know this is going to sound really, is a tool to make a better world. And a better world is a world not just of individuals, it's a world where individuals live in context with other people, with animals, and with the whole ecological system that they are part of. So you've got to shift the focus, because you're right. If you just think about exams, individuals, optimizing, you're never going to get to shift. But if you see the purpose of education differently, then you can start to create the space to start to act differently inside the system. You know, it's ideas which are the limiting factors in our world. It's how ideas become entrenched in systems. And we need to challenge those ideas and not just say, well, that's the way we've always done things and it's great.
And there are schools living that, right? You know, there are certainly some beacons out there that are doing exactly that. So it shows that there are models out there that we could, if we had the opportunity, we could follow. So look, let's move on to the third part of the show. You know, where I want to discuss this being a leadership problem, not necessarily a curriculum problem. And I think that's something that I sort of picked up as I read through sort of quite a lot of your literature, which I find fascinating, by the way, to read. But I feel, and hopefully I'm on the right lines, that you argued that this is primarily not a curriculum problem. It's a leadership and governance problem. Yeah. So what does that mean? And what does that mean to a head of department who's listening live to the show?
Yeah, well, 100%. And I want to say that when I say that, and I want this to come across really clearly to anybody who has a leadership position, who's listening and engaging with this, it is not a leadership problem in the sense of individuals having a deficit. It is a system design problem that leaders are operating within, right? And that's slightly different. As I've said, the systems and structures that govern schools don't reflect what truly, I would say, is essential for education. Because education, you know, schools are entrusted with something really profound, Tim. They're entrusted with shaping the conditions under which future lives will be lived, right? So education is like a form of stewardship. And that is a massive responsibility. And it's like I would call it an intergenerational responsibility. we need to think of ourselves as leaders, not just for the people in front of us, but for future generations that will come. This is the shift. That doesn't mean you stop caring about what's in front of you. But if you only ever care about what's visible, what's measurable, what's immediate, then there's always going to be a tension, because you're expected to kind of care about long-term flourishing and help people to live well in this complicated world. But the system only judges leaders on these short-term metrics, right? Yeah. Did you get X number of students, to get whatever percentage point on your chem data, or this number of A stars or whatever? So, like I was saying, it's not about individuals making bad decisions, the wrong decisions. It's much more about, well, a lot of these people, they're making rational decisions. They're making rational decisions inside the system that they're in. The system incentivizes them to act a certain way, and lo and behold, being humans, they act a certain way, right? Because we all need to make a crust. We all need to, live and work and make money, and that goes for leaders. They need to maintain their jobs. It's not easy being a head teacher or a middle leader or whatever, and it's not easy doing any sort of leadership. So it's not about asking leaders to do more. It's about thinking about the constraints they're in, and whether those constraints, and I guess this is the main point, are aligned with the responsibilities we expect them to carry. And if we expect them to carry certain responsibilities, but we're tying up their hands in systems, then of course they're always going to feel like they're failing, and that they're not achieving, or they're just going to ignore the bigger stuff, because the bigger stuff is too hard to fit into the system. So we've got to shift the system to give leaders the space to actually care about this stuff. It's as simple as that.
So what happens then to the sort of passionate teacher who wants to sort of look at this a lot more? They want to do some work within it, but the leadership team isn't on board. Like, is there an avenue for them to go down?
That is a very difficult, thorny question. I feel like I can only speak really from my own experience. There are huge numbers of organizations out there who can nourish and nurture teachers and help you to find meaning and value and give you opportunities to contribute to this type of work, be it whether through, going the extra mile and doing kind of giving your time in a charitable sense to do extra work with organizations beyond your day job, or obviously contributing through the very act of being engaged in these conversations, promoting the work, etc., etc. At the moment, we don't have any system in the UK which recognizes expert teaching in a formal way. Yeah. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think in some countries, if you're kind of like an expert teacher, you can apply for an extra level of income and then, work with others, etc., etc. What would be amazing is if we had something like that in the UK, but for things not just like expert history teacher, expert philosophy teacher, but expert in sustainability, recognized by almost at a state level, because I'm sure that does happen in individual organizations, but it's not really transferable for someone. It's only transferable if your institution gives you the job of like head of sustainability. But then we all know that head of sustainability in one place is really different to what it means in another place. Yeah. So I'm kind of thinking on the hoof here. If there was some sort of system by which, you could be accredited in a way that's meaningful, and that can actually unleash, maybe extra income, because people need to be rewarded, for being good and doing good stuff. Like, that's nothing wrong with that. Like, So yeah, I'm kind of thinking on the hoof there a little bit. Well, I don't know. What do you think? Does that work? Or
Yeah, I know. In terms of the sort of idea of sustainability within schools, I know there is this idea of a sustainability lead that was presented by the DFE, but again on this idea of sustainability and climate change, which is a slightly different definition there. And we've got this natural history kind of proposal, but that was proposed in 2020. We haven't got any further. And this is I think sometimes the problem, the sticking block for people is that we have these kind of proposals where we do kind of get ideas together on what we could do to take these areas forward, and then they get stuck somewhere. And that's probably part of the problem of our political system with changing governments. But I'm not going to get on the political bandwagon again.
Yes. Yeah.
The next part of the show is make us laugh. Sorry, I didn't put the no expense spared sound effect. So the idea is, to our dear listeners, is can you make us laugh live on air? Now, what stories do you have that bring a smile to faces? And you are welcome just to send me a message on LinkedIn. But my job is to tell that story to my guest and to try and break their steely facade to see if I can make them laugh out loud. So Simon, my challenge is with the help of Michael Wright to share a story with you, if you will. Are you ready?
I'm definitely ready.
I once walked up a flight of stairs with the rest of the school. When I split my trousers, it made quite a noise. I was wearing red underwear, had to waddle to my classroom, and would not move from my chair for the rest of the day.
Why do you think? Okay, I'm going to ask you. Why do you think I'm laughing so hard?
I have got a feeling that you have seen a mirror reflection of one of your own experiences in life.
This has happened to me. Yeah. This has happened.
First of all, a shout out to Michael Wright, who's a true professional. Red underwear and everything. And Simon, I'm glad that you've done it. I have not been a stranger to the odd ripped trouser moment. I got to that point in my career where I had a safety pair of trousers just in a drawer at work.
That's a high level of teacher organization. That's impressive. I'm impressed.
No, it was from humiliating myself way too many times. Michael, I think you passed the test. I think you broke Simon's steely facade. So our next shout out to AQA. AQA know teachers are the real experts in the classroom. That's why they work closely with teachers like you, combining your insight with their assessment expertise to create resources, tools, training, and guidance that genuinely make a difference. They're the UK's most chosen assessment organisation, so chances are you already know their work. And as we head into exam season, hooray, AQA are focused on helping teachers feel supported and ready. If you want to find out more about how they're working with teachers like you, then just head to their website to find out more. So Simon, we're going to swiftly move into part 4 before I test once again your steely resolve and see if you can handle our quick fire quiz. But look, you've done so much work in terms of trying to involve student voice and student agency. And I had a great show with Barry Cooper a few shows back where we talked about the importance of student agency. But you co-founded, if I'm right, the Youth Natural Environment Board. And the question I've got really is what surprised you most about what young people brought to the board and to you?
Oh, wow. I mean, it is the joy of my life to have the opportunity to spend time with passionate, engaged young people. I mean, that's why I love education, because, just the other day, just like everybody, have my up days, my bad days. I think I had some stuff in my mind. I went to my philosophy lesson. In fact, I told my philosophy students this afterwards. Shout out to these two guys. And I wasn't in my best place. A bit stressed, and I just had a great lesson with them, and I forgot about everything. And that's what being with great students and education can do. It can take you out of whatever it is that's ailing you and reorientate you to the good stuff. So coming to your question, when you see what young people can bring in terms of not only their interest, but also their ability to actually move beyond something just symbolic into really informed, thoughtful contributions, and where they start to see themselves not just as learners, but as individuals who are participants in a system, and that their voice is an essential element of helping that system to flourish and to thrive. And for me, it all comes down to Paulo Freire. He talks a lot about the idea that, you know, learners are not just the subjects, sorry, the objects of education. They're the subjects of education. So when you see that agency and you see how young people start to experience themselves as being able to shape the conditions for excellence, it makes a real difference.
So okay, let's kind of get down to it. Like, how do we make sustainability stick in schools? How do we make it actually stick?
I think if we were to do the things that we call for in that open letter, I think if we were to, at a policy level, mandate, I hate to use that word, but mandate that leaders have a responsibility to integrate these approaches, if we were to create space within our curriculum explicitly so that every single young person has the space to explore the critical thinking skills and capacities combined with the precise scientific information, and we do that through actually being willing to look at our curriculum, to look at what mandated and required within it, and to actually make choices about where we put focus and time. And then if we bring that into our initial teacher training, and we bring that into, you know, how a leader can get their NPQSL and other accreditations, then, and when I say bring that, I mean whole school approaches, which it does the things I mentioned earlier, then we'll start to actually see things shift, and we'll see a move from everything being, because actually at the moment, I think literally it's just the case, if you have people who care, stuff happens, right? Yeah. If you have people who see it and think this is important and see it as a vehicle for positive change and think that, yeah, actually this is good education, then, you know, you can have schools which go for it, right? But that it can't be the case that it's just the roll of a dice, that if you're lucky enough to go to that type of school, be it independent or state, where you've got that type of system in place, that you come out of it with those skills and abilities. It has to be systemic. It has to be a minimum base standard that every young person should be able to come out of their education at whatever stage they choose to, having been exposed to the relevant science, having had the opportunities to think about that science and what it means for them as a person, as an agent, to have those debates, to have the critical thinking skills. And yeah, it can't just be a roll of the dice. So we must do this.
It's got to be an empowerment of young people, right? So what's one thing that a classroom teacher could do tomorrow?
Tomorrow, okay.
Well,
so
hopefully most teachers are on a holiday, so hopefully the first piece of advice is put your feet up, relax, grab another cup of tea. Yes. You don't have to go in. You don't have to get that marking done. You're allowed a break. If you're not on spring break yet, I'm really excited for you for next week. But what's one thing that as soon as you get back into the classroom, one thing a teacher could do?
I would love every teacher to find a moment to bring into their pedagogy and their teaching a moment of reflection, which asks where this sits within the wider context of where the world is at the moment. Now, obviously, that is easy done in certain subjects than others. But I do think that if we are creative, this can be done in pretty much every area of school life. There's certainly space for it in tutor time. There's certainly space for it in assemblies, but there's also space for it. There's amazing work where people are linking, even subjects where you might not think these things can come up. Mathematics, for example, there are opportunities to do this. So I would ask every teacher to take that moment to do that meta thinking, which I'm sure many do, but really explicitly. How does what we're learning here link to the wider conditions within which we're living? And through that conversation, it will probably naturally come up, climate change, but also things around anxiety, around inequality and political participation and jobs and AI. Young people need spaces where they are invited in a safe place to be allowed to ask why they're doing what they're doing. Case in point, the field of computer programming is moving at an exponential rate. I would not like to be somebody writing those curriculums. It must be impossible to write something which is up to date and not redundant. And even worse, to be a teacher delivering it, especially if you've got your finger on the pulse, knowing that what you're probably teaching is probably redundant, right? Because, most coding is not going to be done by whatever coding thing. It's done by AI now. So
I teach history, so everything's redundant.
Yeah. Sorry, say that again.
I teach history, so everything is redundant.
It's either everything's redundant or everything is the most meaningful thing, because we all learn from the past, my friend. I used to be a history teacher as well, right?
That's when I'm giving you the applause. Hang on. Look, thank you, Simon. I'm just conscious of our time. I could talk to you forever. I really enjoy our chats, but look, I think it's important that as we get to the end of the show, I just sort of wrap up what I think I'm taking away from the show, and I think that it isn't really a question about whether schools can afford to take sustainability seriously. I think your letter really does put it better than I can. I think the question is can we really afford not to take them seriously? And I'm not sure we have a good answer just yet. Like I don't think this is something that we can put on the back burner and neglect. I think now is the time that we have got to start acting on this and seeing how we can motivate students within the classroom, but also prepare them for the world that's coming up ahead.
100%.
So now this show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning. They're publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. So level up your professional development today and visit www.hachettelearning.com to explore the full range of titles. Now, Simon, it is that time. Quick fire quiz. It is something that I have seen bring genuine jelly to the knees of the most stern and fierce disciplinarians in a school building. It is time, dear listeners, for the quick fire quiz. This is my opportunity to ask Simon as many questions as I can in the space of 1 minute. His job is to answer them as quickly as possible. Bearing in mind he's against the clock. We have seen people crumble in this quiz with 3 responses. Adam Seymour is still leading with 10 correct responses.
10. Okay.
10. So are you ready?
I'm ready. I'm in the zone. Let's do this.
How would you describe where schools are at with sustainability?
Not a good place.
What did you have for breakfast this morning?
I had a tortilla con salchicha. Sorry, I said it in Spanish. I don't know why.
Solar panels or philosophy? Which does more for a school's sustainability?
Philosophy.
If you could ban one piece of educational jargon forever, what would it be?
Oh my word! I don't know. I try not to use that much jargon. I've lost it now.
You can pass.
I'm passing. I can't think.
Sorry, best thing a student has ever said to you about the planet?
Sir, and I hate when they call me sir. Sir, I think we can actually do this. I think we can make it better.
Sticky notes or a whiteboard?
Whiteboard, obviously.
One word that sums up the state of curriculum design in schools right now.
Fragmented.
What's one thing in your bag right now that tells us everything about you?
The fact that it is incredibly disorganized with loads of ripped up pieces of paper.
That was pretty good, Simon. That was 7. That's definitely a round of applause.
I messed it up on the jargon one. I can't even right now. I'm trying to think of a piece of jargon. What would be your go-to piece of jargon? What's your?
Oh, I get to ask the questions. I don't. Have
Oh,
to
you don't get to.
any.
I don't get to ask them back. Ah, okay. I forgot how this works. Yeah. I'm trying to flip it on you. You know, I'm doing
Edit
that.
this out. Edit this out. Yeah,
Okay,
edit this
that
out.
power
Okay,
play.
yeah. Look, so dear listeners, thank you for listening to the live show. If you're catching up on your podcast, thanks again for tuning in. Please don't forget to like, download, comment, and interact. It really does make a difference to the show. With your support, we can at TTR make sure that teachers have a voice in education. Now, you guys have been listening to The Late Show with Tim Smale on Teachers Talk Radio. I would like to say a huge thank you to my guest tonight, Simon Lightman. I have been so privileged to have you on the show. I found it fascinating, and I feel like we could really go on. I'm Tim Smale. Thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, a world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.